Welcome to the Level Up Show. This is episode number 12. My name is Pamela Dale, your GHL gal, and we have a guest today. It's a little bit different, but yet right on track of where we're going with the Level Up Show. And that is Mike Vera. He's here to talk to us about health. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pamela. It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, as you said, my name is Mike Vera. I'm a board certified health coach, but I can tell you I'm not your average board certified health
Mhm.
coach because I spend most of my time talking about influence and propaganda. And I actually, as weird as this sounds, see that as the key to health, mostly because we live in a world that is surrounded by influence and propaganda. And as health coaches, we talk about what signals are your environment sending you? Is that influencing those snacks that you're eating or that exercise that you're not doing? Your environment is a factor. And we often fail to pay attention to the information and the levels of influence in our environment. And so I think once we all sort of see how these mechanisms work, these mechanisms of influence, we can figure out how we are currently being influenced, and we can actually use those same tools and tactics to influence ourselves instead of allowing us to be influenced by others.
Let's break down the word propaganda.
Okay.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah. So propaganda, most people today, when I bring up that word, they think of, Russian political propaganda and war propaganda, things like that. And that's true. But propaganda itself is really the coordinated propagation of information to shape the thoughts and behaviors of a targeted population. Historically, propaganda has been used from governments and religions and corporations. It's merely a neutral tool, is what propaganda is. And I think today we have this negative view of it because it seems like all the quote unquote bad guys are the ones using it. And I think that's why it's viewed so negatively. But the way you fight bad propaganda is with good propaganda and by exposing the tactics that the bad propagandists are using. So, propaganda isn't this evil, nefarious thing. It's something I think most of us should be more aware of.
And with regards to health and propaganda, what is it that we are inundated with and what are the hazards of it?
Well, you look around at the country, where are all the healthy people, right? You see chronic disease, you see just about every health ailment on the rise. I mean, everybody has something going on, it seems like, in terms
Right.
of their health. And so it seems worth asking what's influencing that. And we can talk about the food and the pesticides and all these little nitty gritty details all day. But, when it really comes down to it, the propaganda, the marketing, the advertising, all of these methods of influence are not only shaping our opinions about the decisions we make around our health, but it's shaping our behaviors. So, because it's shaping our opinions and our thoughts, it's leading us to behave in ways that maybe are not as healthy as we would like. And so, it's important to realize propaganda, influence, marketing, all these sorts of things. It's important to realize when they're going on, how to decipher it, how to analyze it. But also, more practically, once we realize those tools and tactics, we can really set up our environment to kind of propagandize ourselves, to really influence ourselves in a way that can be very productive. And that's true whether you're talking about health, business, or you're trying to join the Olympics, whatever it is, you can really influence yourself towards your goals.
What I heard you say was that we need to kind of zoom out from the list of things that you'd said, which is fast food, chemicals, etc., and zoom out to why is it that we are consuming those?
Yeah.
And you're saying that there's these messages. What are some that you've seen recently that are dangerous?
Yeah. Well, I actually try to avoid specifically saying that right there is
Mm,
propaganda. Like, don't listen to this message over here. One thing that I really take pride in with my messaging is by encouraging people to do their own critical thinking. I really hesitate to do the critical thinking for them and go, hey, I'm the expert here. I've thought about this. You need to think the way that I do. I'm telling you that this right here is propaganda. I don't want to do that. To me, that's the equivalent of somebody hiring me as a personal trainer, and then I go and do all the push-ups for them.
Right.
My mission really is to wake people up, and I mean a few things by that, but one of them is really to wake people up to their own capacity to critically think, because there is this tendency in society to outsource our thinking to the experts. Because when you trust the experts, that's what is going on. You're outsourcing that thought process in your own brain and saying, "You're gonna do this for me." And I say that neutrally because sometimes you wanna do that. Sometimes, I have a doctor, I don't know how to think medically about certain things, I need to be able to trust this person. So I'm not saying don't trust anybody at all and become a crazy paranoid maniac. I'm definitely not saying that. But there is a healthy sense of skepticism I think should be had. And that's really how you can learn to parse the propaganda is by doing the critical thinking, by being skeptical, by not taking the information put in front of us at face value so that we can learn to weigh things against other things. Like, okay, so this person over here is saying this, but is that true? Are there conflicts of interest? What are other people saying? What are the opponents of those ideas say about what this guy is saying? And by going back and forth like that, critically thinking, we can get closer to the truth.
So parallel to the business industry as well, where we have so many people buying courses or this guru or that guru and not doing that critical thinking and mixing it also with their own wants, needs, desires, and what they actually need for their business, never mind their health. How do you teach someone to critically think? What's the first
So,
steps?
yeah, I see health coaching as a type of collaborative critical thinking. So it's not like I sit down and I say, "Hey, here is how I want you to think." It's really like the same way you teach somebody to ride a bike is like you put them on the bike, they're gonna fall down a few times and they just learn by doing it. Health coaching, at least my take on health coaching is this is a collaborative critical thinking process. So you and I together, I'm going to do 20% of the talking. You're going to do 80% of the talking. That's generally how it goes. And really, the words that I'm saying, let me put it this way, actually. So imagine I'm your health coach and you come to me, you want to change your diet, let's say. And I go, okay, everything you're eating now is wrong. You're gonna not eat that anymore. I want you
Mhm.
to eat this way. Here's a sheet. You're gonna eat this from now on. You're also gonna start exercising. I'm gonna tell you what to do from now on. You're not putting any thought into that. I'm robbing you of your opportunity to critically think. So instead, it's really, of course, an extended process. We can't do this in a single hour session. So it does take some time. But let's figure out where you are now, where you're trying to get to, and how we're going to leverage your strengths towards success, towards those goals that you want to get to. And so the whole thing is really asking questions about what's currently in your head. What are you articulating? And I'm listening on a very deep, intense level to read between the lines, to hear your strengths so that I can bring them up later. It really is a very influential process. I often say I use the tools of the propagandists, but I use it as a force for good. I'm not trying to get you to buy some crappy supplements that you don't need. I really, my goal is to get to a point where you never feel the need to work with me again because your critical thinking is just that much stronger after coaching.
How did you get here? You're different.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think there's probably a few things. I'm left-handed. I don't know if that I always thought that, the hemispheric lateralization has something to do with the personality differences. And I say that half jokingly. I do know left-handed people who I think they're pretty different. But where it really all started for me was with George Carlin, the stand-up comedian
Oh,
who
yes.
woke me up at the age of 13. He really woke me up. He told me, I downloaded him on Napster. So I'm not an in-person conversation, but I downloaded him on Napster. It was the first time I heard stand-up comedy. And further, it was the first time I heard anyone tell me, challenge authority, question what you're reading, really be skeptical. Things that as a 13-year-old, I heard only the opposite. I heard listen to authority, accept what you're reading. The total inverse of what George Carlin was saying.
Yes.
And so at that point for me, I really feel like that's when my consciousness really turned on. That never left me. It's still very much here to this day. It drives me fundamentally. And because he woke me up in that way, just such a powerful experience, I really am on a mission to wake people up similarly as well. And I've always wanted to be a comedian. Like I
Mhm.
really have always wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And the older I got, the more I realized it wasn't just like being a stand-up comedian what I wanted. It was that, like, waking people up, challenging the status quo, saying controversial things and getting away with it, and having people show up to listen just to the words that you have to say is such a amazing and beautiful thing to me. And here I am today, on my efforts to do exactly that, and I'm very happy doing it.
I remember George Carlin's bit around the 7 words you can't say on TV. Do you
Oh,
remember?
yeah.
So he was very influential for me as well. Yeah, I always wanted to be a comedian, and I think that there's that link there about just being unique and different and saying what's on your mind. And not everyone does that. And I think it's a really great way to go about building a business and a brand. And that's something else I wanted to talk to you about. It was one of the first things that I thought was the most sexiest thing was your setup and the red pill. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of influences there, but I think most relevant is as a health coach, I'm already kind of different. There aren't many male health coaches out there. I think it's like 90% of health coaches are women. So
Woman.
by default, I kind of stand out
Mhm.
already. And I bring, my own personality. I don't hide it in my business. I mean, it's very much a part of my business. But one thing I noticed very quickly when I got into health coaching originally is that it's all very similar. Like, you look at the messaging of health coaches out there, it's health coaches talking mostly to health coaches about health coaching is is what it seemed like to me,
Right.
and that's fine. I love health coaching, I love talking about it, but you're not gonna reach anyone that way, you're not gonna stand out that way. The other thing is I talk to a lot of health coaches individually who have a lot of very strong opinions about things, and they're afraid to express them or attach that to their business. It's like, what's the point of putting yourself out there if you're gonna self-censor and be afraid of the reaction that you're gonna get? So I'm trying to lead by example and really say, "Hey, don't be afraid to say what you gotta say. Say it loudly and proudly." And, so far for me, the experience has been overwhelmingly positive. I
Mhm.
get very supportive messages from people, and, maybe a little disappointingly, I do get, quiet supportive messages. People send me messages saying, "Hey, I love what you're putting out there, but I just don't wanna say it publicly. You're talking
Mhm.
about propaganda and challenging authority. I love it, but I don't want to put myself out there to support it." And I get it. I do get that. But it is interesting how afraid some people are to just say the truth, what they know to be the truth. And I do hope that changes very soon.
I think in business, it's imperative to have a voice and to stand up for something and have an opinion and something that's got some polarity to it, right? It's not that boring neutral. And I talk with business owners all day long, and they won't, first of all, they don't barely know themselves enough to know what is different about them or what those values are. And
Mm.
how many people are they going to upset by saying that they don't really, right? Like, you know where I'm going with this. And it's
Yeah.
really challenging because I know that to that is tied their financial wind. It's there. It's in who they really naturally are. And if we're suppressing that person or worried that we're going to upset cousin Ned, right? It's really going to be challenging. You see them pedaling so fast and just not really getting anywhere. Very.
Yeah, I love the I'm very comfortable in the controversy and,
Mhm.
I'm gonna be careful how I say this because I'm not a mean person. I don't wanna insult anybody, but I don't mind being offensive. Like, the truth is offensive, and
Yeah.
if that's the case, I'm here to offend.
Yeah.
So I really see it that way. But there are a lot of people out there, especially hyper compassionate health coaches who are afraid to step on any toes at all, and their messages are just so benign, eat salads and exercise. Like, who doesn't know that already? If you
Right.
don't, if you're afraid to be controversial, when I say controversial, I do mean that neutrally also, because I know some people hear that and they think of it as like, oh, you're controversial, you're out there offending and insulting people. That's not what I mean. I mean something worthy of conversation, really. Uh, because good luck talking about salads and push-ups all day. Even when you think of, like, let's say, just for the sake of argument, you're advertising baseball gloves. I mean, if you're just so boring and you're, "Hey, this is a baseball glove, it catches the baseball," you know, yeah, we know that. But, like, if you wanna get any attention at all, how are you gonna stand out in the crowd? You have to be a little controversial. You have to maybe offend the football players who have no interest in baseball, right? Like, you have to differentiate yourself somehow. And I do think that takes an element of bravery. Not that I see myself in that way, because I don't even think like, "Oh, I'm out here being brave." I don't think about it at all, really. It's just who I am and what I do. So, for those who maybe feel like they need bravery to speak up, I hope they find it.
Absolutely. I always call it courage. And courage, I think, comes from you're sitting on something that's kind of hurting. And it could be a relationship, it could be money, it could be all sorts of things. Maybe you don't like your job. That can give us enough courage to move forward. But a lot of us are just taking like half a courage step and not going all the way. That's going to make this thing really work. And it's the same in health. I think salad, like somebody who's been on 43 different diets, right? I already hear all of that and I just eye roll it. I'm just like, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah. I need to hear something different. I need to hear what's really going on, what would resonate for me. And if somebody would be strong enough to actually say what that is and do a little bit of work around what is that? Like that thinking work? Like, what is that piece? And it's usually tied to something as unique as a George Carlin experience. I can always, when talking with business owners, trace it back to a moment like that.
Yeah.
And it's the change in the way that they looked at the world. And that's that point where we differentiate from, and it can be something that's not even what we would call controversial. It's just different. And if we could just even step into it, but we're so concerned, especially women, with the relationships around us, and we don't have the courage to even speak up in our own homes. And
Yeah.
that takes us to that topic around environment that is
Actually,
so
if you don't
powerful.
mind, I don't mean to cut you off, but,
Please go.
before I lose this, I think you made a very powerful point about courage needing strength is very important because, like, right there, implicitly, you're going into something uncomfortable, and I think a lot of people who hold back on that courage or hold back on that bravery or strength, they're kind of waiting for some right magical moment where things are not gonna be scary anymore, or things are just gonna be the perfect circumstances that you need, where bravery or courage isn't even a factor anymore. It's like, "Wow, this is the magical moment. Now I can do what I've been waiting to do for the past 10 years." And you know what? That's not how life works. And even if it were, by the time those 10 years are over and you get to this fictitious magical place, everybody who was courageous and brave enough to do what they wanted to do will have surpassed you by leaps and bounds. So the
God.
time is now. The time is right now. Be brave, be courageous, go into the uncertainty and the discomfort, because that's the only way you really grow in life.
The same message is said with every business owner ever that's done something that's worthwhile of their life. And yet people still will disregard the message.
Sure.
They will
Yeah.
just disregard it. And that's a psychological turmoil that I was in. And anybody listening, it's only self inflicted. It's going to be time one day, and
Yeah.
or it's going to be too late. So it's really impressive if we can take control of our own world and our own destiny and move forward with what we want. Because those people, in the end, doesn't even have anything to do with us. It's about them. And we need to have some
Right.
courageous conversations, a lot of us in our own homes, so that we can not get to the ends of our lives and go, geez, I wished I would have. And we divorced the bugger 10 years ago anyway, right? Or parents have passed and things like that. So, yeah, it's the environment. I know when we first had our quick call to see if we wanted to move forward, I talked about the difference between a church and a bar. We act different in those places. And it's important to have those environments. And also, I think what I was hearing from you was protect those environments
Mhm.
from some of these messages and some of these things. And we really connected on the environment issue. Can you tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so protect yourself as much as you can, as much as is reasonable when you're in a certain environment. So ideally, control your own environment as much as you can, whether that's your home, your bedroom, your workspace, whatever it is. You don't want to just stumble into an environment that's sending you signals that might be influencing you to do unproductive or even destructive things, right? Because alcoholics, drug addicts, their environment plays a role in those
Yeah.
sorts of behaviors. So you have to be very deliberate in how you set up your environment. And I'll tell you what, I use this example all the time. Here's a perfect example of a deliberately curated environment that absolutely influences just about all of us. You go into Target, I want to buy two things, and then you walk out and you have 10 things. What happened there? Well, your environment influenced you. You were in a very deliberately set up environment,
Yeah.
right? It's no accident that the lighting is the way it is, the products are positioned the way they are, the music, the smells, the colors, the packaging, the messaging, the all of the where things are placed within the store. All of that is very deliberately orchestrated so that you spend as much money as you can. And then we get home from Target, we unload the things that we bought, and then we just fail. Many of us fail to think of the signals that our own environment might be sending us. And similar to how we were just influenced at Target, we might not realize that we're doing the same thing to ourselves inadvertently. Like, why am I eating so many snacks at night? Well, it's basically because you've set your environment up the same way Target would to get you to buy those snacks, right? You have them there ready to go, calling your name, positioned in an easy to reach place. I'm not against snacking, but I do work with people who want to reduce snacking. And it's like, let's talk about the environment and the signals that your environment is sending to you. So how can we change that? And, there of course, your environment is gonna be different from somebody else's, and it's very individualized, which is one of the beautiful things of health coaching is that it's a one-on-one sort of thing. There's also group coaching for similar-minded people. But yeah, controlling your environment is just one of the lowest hanging fruit things that you can do to bring yourself closer to the goals that you want to accomplish.
And what about those things? I can hear it. I said it myself. There's some things in my environment I can't control. I got a husband, I got children, they want to eat different. I work, 50 hours a week and I can only use prepackaged foods. You can hear all the excuses. What are
Yeah.
some of the things you would say around that?
Two things come to mind. One of them is have your own set of standard operating procedures. Now, that's a very complex subject I could talk about for the next 10 days, and it's what I help my clients with the most. But the short version of that is you already have standard operating procedures, right? Even if it's not deliberate, even if you have not said to yourself, this is what I want my
Mm.
morning routine to be like, whatever you do in the morning repeatedly is your morning routine. So you already have standard operating procedures. I argue that people would just benefit from making those standard operating procedures a little more deliberate. And again, that's what I help people with. But another way to defend yourself against the undue influence of others, or if you're in another environment, is to have a strong sense of values. Understand yourself. What do you stand for? Because a lot of people have no idea. Like I've actually asked people, and I say, what are your values? And they pause and they go, I don't know, and that's fine. I come from a place of compassion and respect, and I don't judge anybody. But if you don't stand for anything, you're going to be influenced by the very strong values of others, really, because we're out here in a propaganda world. Really, you see it everywhere. Every time you turn on your TV, every time you open up your phone, every time you talk to a friend who doesn't know that they have received some propaganda. We do have to at least a little bit understand what our values are so that we can behave according to our values instead of behaving according to the signals that our environment are sending us.
In business, that's sort of the first steps I have people do. And it's one of the most challenging because they're so unclear. And I always say, is that your value or is that come from your church? Is that your value or did that come from your mom? Well, I grew up that way, but is it what you really value? Is it who you really are? It's that thinking work that I'd mentioned. It takes the courage to do that and inquire and knowing that the changes that need to come as a result of you being you are okay, because I
Mm,
don't think we would have been made to have those values or who we are and then not be given the same skills to make it happen. And a lot of our values come from our childhood, something that was lacking or something that was, there was an event like what happened for you. For me, I had an event in my childhood and 100% freedom. I want to be free. Everything I do comes around freedom, and truth is number two. It's got to resonate. I hear the truth. We can hear it. We know it, right? And I know that that's where those are. But I was the furthest from free, and I was too scared to say anything. So the
mm.
turmoil inside of that shows up in weight, shows up in all of the relationships, shows up in our money. And I always think that the values are one of the first places we need to take a look at.
Yeah, and not having values, you could make a case that a lack of values is what leads to an unhappy life
Yeah.
because you're basically like a pinball machine in like a pinball in a pinball
Yeah.
machine, just bouncing around whatever environment you happen to be in, whether it's at work, at Target, anywhere else. You're not thinking, you're just responding. There's
Yeah.
no thought really there if you don't have that sense of values. How can you be happy like that if you're really just being pushed and pulled around? I don't think you can be happy like that, at least not authentically happy. 'Cause I do think there are some people out there who do, like the comfort that comes along with not having to make any decisions and not having to critical think. There are definitely people out there who like that, and that might be working for them temporarily, but that does not last long at all.
I learned early on, and I don't know if this resonates for you or not, but it happens, those things, the reason they won't stand in their values is because they don't want the responsibility of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, ah, that's interesting how that word victim comes up, right? If I'm not taking responsibility, then I'm a victim. And a lot of us live in that place. And if we could grab a hold of that responsibility that we do have enough to manage it and take our lives and direct our lives where we want them to go, if it doesn't look that way, then we're in the wrong environment.
Mm,
Need to get some people around us that will allow us to build and be who we are. And those can happen very easily once we make the decision. I've always had people just magically appear when it's
mm,
time. So there's that little bit of a leap of faith when we go to make this decision, but it's
yeah.
so intertwined.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned people there within the environment because people do constitute your environment. Just like I said, information is a part of your environment. And
Mm.
it's funny when I work with people and we talk about avoiding toxic exposure, in my head, I'm thinking BPA, glyphosate, all these like, industrial poisons that are in our environment. And I would say 8 times out of 10, the first thing that comes to mind when I say, let's talk about avoiding toxic exposure. Oh, you mean toxic people, right? It's crazy how it just seems like all of us have a toxic person in our life, whether it's a coworker or very often a family member, and that can be
Yes.
tough to deal with because, you know,
Yes.
a lot of us, most of us have the value of family. We value our family, and it can be a tough decision to make when it comes to removing toxic people in our lives. And that's another example of when bravery, courage, or strength can really come in handy.
And really deciding on the dream that you want for yourself and the goals. And we've all heard that phrase of, the 5 things that people regret when they die, right? When
Sure.
just before they, and we know what those are. And 90% of the time, it's not living their life,
Mhm.
not living the life they're here to live. So, well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. How can our listeners learn more about you?
Well, my official website is redpillhealthandwellness.com, which I realize is a lot to type in. So if you go to mikevera.com, that will redirect you to it's like a link tree page. So it has my social media, my podcast, my website. And I will add, this is the first place I'm going to announce this. I have a new program slash book coming out called Creating Time Wealth. that is really it's my effort to encapsulate all of the standard operating procedure work that I do with my clients that really takes up the most time, that can often be the most complex, but is really, in my opinion, the absolute number one biggest thing that can help people with their health, with their business, with absolutely whatever it is. So, creating time wealth will be for pre-sale very soon, depending on when this episode goes live. I should have a link where people can pre-purchase that.
Perfect. And we'll put all the links down below as well so people can reach you. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been incredibly valuable and absolutely love the fact that you know George Carlin and you just took on and just did your own thing. And what a beautiful voice in the world to have. Thank you.
Well, well, thank you so much, Pamela. This was a lot of fun.
See you soon.